Hi, it's David at David Smith. So, with this lesson, what I thought I'd do is start showing you how I started figure drawing. So, to understand figure drawing, you've got to understand, obviously, the basics of how the human body is essentially made up. And we went through the details with the face, how the face was constructed. So, similarly, we have how the body's constructed. Now, the universal standard for drawing is 8 heads high. Yeah, so that is what is regarded as artistically the standard. So we've then got, obviously you can see how wide this is. So it's approximately 3 heads wide, 8 heads high. Now, the actual standard for our country, I suppose, or our race, is more like 7.5. So, again, with this one, you're looking nearly a head wide, 2 heads wide, 7.5 high. So, what I've tried to do here is just play on these characters a little bit, just to show how it differs. Now, when we move into this big fella on the end, this is considered athletic, start pushing into superhero territory. So you can see when you start getting your head around figure drawing, how you can then start playing with obviously the dimensions, but to understand the basics allows you to play with this and alter this. It also, say if you were coming up with, I suppose, something like Lord of the Rings or something like that, and you wanted to draw a picture based on those characters, this is a good starting point for working out how the various characters all alter in width and height to one another, so there's that interplay between them all. Now, I've already mentioned about this guy in the middle being 8 heads high approximately and 3 heads wide. Now, what you've got to bear in mind as well is when you do start figure drawing is dimensions. How far, use this hand, how far the arm actually comes down, kind of comes down halfway between, well, like the thigh, so between the hip and the knee. Yeah. Again, when we start figure drawing, one of the things which people will often fail on, and we all do this, is proper lengths of limbs. So the Vitruvian Man, which Leonardo da Vinci did, and they were all familiar with it, with this guy with his arms out and his legs out. You can see just how long the limbs are when you see that picture, and again on here. So be aware of that, and if you're drawing something and it's not feeling quite right, it can sometimes be down to the length of the limbs. So just have that in the back of your mind when you start playing with these things. Now, when you get your head around these kind of sizes, you can then, as I mentioned, you can start playing with it. So it's very easy then, when you've got your basic guy, to start altering the height and the width. And again, we can take the superhero character to even more extremes. So you can see how wide this guy is now in comparison to what we consider the norm. So again, you can start playing on this. Now, normally, if I was teaching figure drawing, it would be probably in a class, and we would all be taking it in turns to sit on a chair or stand for a pose, and everybody would take turns as we move around the class, and we'd all take turns drawing that person who's then posing. Obviously I can't do that. We need to convey this over a video, so what we have to bear in mind, hopefully we've got that on the camera, when we start figure drawing is not to get hung up on the tiny details initially. What we'll be doing, even before we get to this stage, is more like when you've seen me flesh out some of the other characters, when I've put the bones through the limbs. So in reality, if we were drawing this guy in this pose, we're going to be looking at literally the line of the shoulders. These are the lines what we're going to be kind of putting in there. We're going to stick to the bones of the character. So if I was drawing this character, he was stood there in front of me, this is how I would kind of be looking at it. Now, what you're trying to do, and often when you're drawing figures and things like that, you might be sat in the park. I know we can't do this at the moment, but you might be sat in the park drawing people milling around. So nobody's going to sit there for a ridiculous length of time while you get your pose right. So what it is that you're trying to do is get all the essential elements down in as rapid a time as possible, because if that person then moves, you've lost the pose. If they then stand there for longer, you can then start putting in extra detail. But as you can see from here, and I'm going in a lot darker than I really would normally, we're fleshing out. So we've got the angle of the shoulder, we're allowing for perspective, we've got the angle of the hips, we've then got these central bones running through the legs, picking on the pose. If we've then got time, we would then be looking at where the line of the eyes are, the line of the face, so through the centre, through the nose, and we can then start quickly. And again, we don't need the smooth lines at the moment. It's about capturing that pose in as short a time as possible, because we can then take these things home and work on them and flesh them out. Because once you're familiar with how the human body looks, like we've shown you on the other pictures, we can then flesh them out. So we know roughly how wide the thigh is in comparison to a calf, and we take this skeleton pose that we've come up with and we can flesh that out. But what you're trying to achieve is capturing that moment in time and taking that with you. Now, if you're doing this as part of an art class or something like that, people will sit there and pose for you as long as you ask them to. But obviously when you're doing it from sitting in the park, say, you don't have that kind of luxury. So it's about capturing those key elements. So very quickly, and that has taken me literally 3 minutes possibly. So yes, I know I'm tracing over the top, but we were able from that pose to capture the wireframe and then from there flesh it out. And again, it's a lot rougher than this one, but we can then work into this drawing, start putting on the details afterward. Okay, so because we don't have the facility to go out, I'll just shift these all out of the way. Yeah, because we don't have the facility to go out at the moment, we need to improvise. So we can either ask a family member to sit there for us in a variety of poses. Often when somebody's watching TV, that's a great time to draw them because they're going to be sat there for a length of time. So look to do that. Or obviously we can borrow images from the internet. Well, now we're not using them for any purposes other than to draw them. So if you can see this, I've got this guy in a pose from the internet on one of the free image sites. So what I'm kind of looking to do, and with this exercise, that is what I need to do actually. Just bear with me. I've misplaced my pen. What I would prefer you to do with this exercise is change to a biro. Now, what that will do is it will tend to speed you up, but because you can't rub the lines out, you become less precious over what it is that you're drawing. So if you make a mistake, you don't worry. You've not got enough minutes to go past. You haven't got enough time, to start rubbing out, redoing and things like that. You become less precious about it. You also start putting down the key lines. So very quickly we're going to be looking at, again, putting the spine into there. We're looking at the angle of the shoulders, trying to keep this perspective, angle of the hips. We're then looking to put the arms into there. Now, if there's a line in there which is going to benefit you, like so for this guy, the shoulders, by all means pop that in. But again, don't be precious over it. The head literally can be very basic. Now this guy's obviously wearing a t-shirt and stuff, so we can address that in a little bit later in our drawing if we've still got enough time. Now these first drawings, what I'd like you to do when you're practicing these is to spend no more than 5 minutes on each drawing. And again, what that will do is quicken you up. So what we're going to use, now you would normally obviously eye it in, see that the knee joint is, say, comes halfway up, partly to his chest. We work it down, so his knee joint is going to be roughly in this kind of area. And his foot somewhere along them lines. Now, what we've got left within our 5 minutes, we can then start bulking out these limbs. Got this t-shirt which is hanging loosely, but it's tailored a little. And again, because we can't rub any of these lines out, we're just going for it. It sounds crazy at first, but by just concentrating at this stage on throwing these key lines in, when you then start spending longer on your drawings, it will improve how much detail you can get into your drawing relatively short amount of time. Beauty of this is as well, you get a whole boatload of poses. If you keep hold of them, if you ever need a pose for a particular piece of work that you're working on, you've got a whole raft of poses what you can refer to with people in these various poses. So you've got them as reference material there. So take that out, we can start just refining the face. Now the reason for doing these 5-minute sketches, and you build up, you do a series of 5-minute sketches, you do a series of 10-minute sketches, then you extend it to 15. From 15 you then go to half an hour. But if you work this up over a series of, say, weeks or days, depending on how often you draw, you can then start to improve how much detail, because what will happen is if you don't do it that way, you don't practice in that way. So I'm not happy with how this face is, but the overall pose is virtually there. The head probably isn't in scale for this drawing, but because I'm not being precious over it, I don't have to worry about that. I'm not fixating on the head, and by doing that I've lost the pose, the model's moved on, and the overall drawing's lost. Now what I can then do off to the side is, if necessary, I could do another study of the face, try and get that detail into there, something I'm a little bit happier with, so I've at least not lost that part of it. But yeah, what you often see is when people first start figure drawing, they'll sit here and they'll just be concentrating on the head, on the head, on the head. So they've got a great face done, the rest of the body hasn't even been drawn, which when you figure drawings kind of defeating the whole point of it. So as I say, start with the 5-minute, see how much line work you can get drawn in within that 5 minutes, and then slowly build the time up, and believe me, it will make a massive difference. So this head's better than this one. This is starting to look a bit cartoony, I suppose, but this is what you'll be looking to do. So I'm not sure what the time is on that one, but we're then going to move on to a new pose. So 5 minutes elapses, we get the new model, we get the new person to sit in front of us, we start again. So by the end of, say, an hour session, you might have 5, 6, 7 pictures all drawn up, depending on what kind of time you're leaving in between. Well, this one's slightly a more complicated pose. This lady here, but again, looking for the angle of the shoulders. We've then got one arm which is going to cross over her body, tucks back underneath, so we're not just kind of intimating where these bones are going to be. Now she's got a knee up underneath her, so we need to be looking at this angle. And again, we're going to throw that in, see how far the foot is coming over past, if that's the end of that arm there, how far past does this foot extend. We've then got the other leg, which is kind of behind, and at the moment it's very scrappy, it's very messy, but we're getting a lot of key information down. We're getting limb lengths down, the shape of the limbs, the shapes that they're cutting against each other as they move around. Excuse me if you're still hearing noises. It's my daughter banging around upstairs. So again, at this point, we're not so worried about major details. If there's something intrinsic, throw it in by all means. Might be the shape of, if they're wearing a particular garment that you need to get in because it's critical to the drawing. Now we're a little bit lower than the model in this picture, so this arm now becomes quite critical because everything's starting to work off of that. This arm tucks back in underneath here. This one comes back through underneath and is holding the leg in place. Come into the hip area and we can start bringing this leg into play then. So again, because we've worked either side of this bone, and then see now I can see this needs to be extended a little bit longer because I'm not precious over my picture. I'm not starting to rub everything out and thinking, oh no, it's wasted, it's wasted. We're just going to draw past it. And got the other leg around the back, extends past here. It's not until you start drawing like this that you realise just how long-limbed the human body really is. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, it's often one of those classic mistakes when people this person's then throw the seat into there. Again, now probably spent a little bit over 5 minutes on this one, but you can start seeing the difference now. We're starting to take this idea of the wireframe to throw in these limbs, try and gain the pose initially. We know the head's going to occupy this area. There's no detail in this face whatsoever. We can come back to that kind of thing depending on what kind of time constraints we've got. Probably be easier if I didn't have this dark to this photograph. But there we go. So we can start putting those details in. We've got this shirt kind of riding up a little bit here. But again, very quickly, we've got the key element of this drawing, this pose. So if we were in the park with our sketch pad, we can be firing these out. People are sat there feeding the ducks, walking the dogs, things like that, sitting there having a picnic. Even on the beach is another great place. I mean, I'll often take my sketch pad to the beach when we're on holiday and just sit there doodling away, drawing the kids, drawing people splashing around and things like that, sat there making sandcastles. By doing these exercises, by practicing like this, by starting with the 5-minute drawing, moving on to the 10 and working your way through it, it will make you a more accomplished figure drawer. It will give you a greater understanding of how the human body is constructed, the lengths of the limbs and things like that, and the interplay. And by doing that, you will then have a greater understanding ready for if you go down, say, the illustration route and you start manipulating those things like we've done on this. Once you understand this, it's very easy to move on to these type of things. But by not getting a firm grasp of the fundamentals, you're always going to struggle. That element of your capabilities is always going to be somewhat lacking. So during this week, why not try what I say? Get the sketch pad out, do some of the 5-minute sketches, do some of the 10-minute sketches. If you want to email them through to me, or if you've got any other questions that you want to ask, get a couple of biros, little ballpoint pens, cheap as chips, these things. Have a go and just enjoy yourself. And if it doesn't work out at the end of the day, what have you lost? A 5-minute sketch. Bin it, start again. But give that a go this week. I'm still doing my art challenge, so it's dinosaur week this week, so hopefully we'll get a few more dinosaur pictures, but keep looking out for those, keep sharing, keep subscribing, and I'll catch you on the next video. Well, thanks for your time, catch you later, bye bye.